When my daughter said I ruined her wedding, I didn't argue. I just smiled, because I knew every petal, every plate, and every fake smile in that room was paid for by me. Let me tell you how we got here, because this isn't just about a wedding. It's about 28 years of love that somehow became invisible. Sarah was 3 years old when her father walked out. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. He left a note on the kitchen counter, right next to her little mermaid cereal bowl. "I need to find myself," it said, as if he'd been lost somewhere between our mortgage payments and his daughter's laughter. I didn't cry that day. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I picked up Sarah, kissed her forehead, and promised her something. I promised her that she would never feel the absence of what we'd lost, that her life would be full, that her dreams would be safe. And she had so many dreams. Even as a little girl, Sarah would play wedding with her dolls. She'd drape dish towels over their heads like veils and march them down an imaginary aisle between our couch and the TV stand. "Mommy," she'd say, her eyes wide and glittering, "when I get married, it's going to be perfect, just like a princess." I'd smile and nod, folding laundry or stirring pasta, thinking how beautiful her imagination was, how untouched by the complications of real life. "I'll make it happen, baby," I told her once, "no matter what it takes." I meant it. God help me, I meant every word. The years went by in that strange way they do when you're raising a child alone, slow and fast at the same time. I worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood, administrative assistant during the day, waitress 3 nights a week, sometimes 4 if the tips were good. I sold my mother's pearl necklace to pay for Sarah's college application fees. I traded in my car for an older model so she could have a reliable one for her campus commute. I stopped buying new clothes for myself and learned to hem and patch and make do. And I was happy to do it. That's what people don't understand. I wasn't a martyr, I was a mother. There's a difference. Sarah thrived. She made friends, got good grades, joined clubs. By the time she graduated college, she'd grown into this confident, beautiful woman who seemed to have the world figured out. I was so proud of her. So proud I could barely breathe sometimes. Then she met Ethan. He was handsome, I'll give him that. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who knew exactly how to smile in photos. He worked in finance, drove a leased BMW, and talked about investments and building wealth like he'd invented the concept. The first time Sarah brought him home for dinner, he looked around our modest apartment with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not disgust, more like curiosity, the way you might look at a museum exhibit about how people used to live. "This is cozy," he said, which is what people say when they can't think of anything nice. But Sarah was glowing. She held his hand across my kitchen table and looked at him like he'd hung the moon. And I thought, okay, if he makes her happy, then I'll love him too. That's how it works. The engagement happened 6 months later. Ethan proposed at some expensive restaurant I'd never heard of, with a ring that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Sarah called me sobbing, so happy she could barely form words. "Mom," she said, "it's happening, my dream wedding, it's finally happening." And just like that, I was back at that kitchen counter, looking at my little girl in her dish towel veil, promising her the world. "We'll make it perfect," I told her. I had about $40,000 saved. It was supposed to be my retirement nest egg, the foundation of whatever security I'd have in my old age. But when Sarah started sending me Pinterest boards and magazine clippings and links to venues, I didn't hesitate. What's money compared to your child's happiness? What's security when you're gone, compared to seeing your daughter's face light up on the most important day of her life? I started saying yes to everything. The venue at the Botanical Gardens. Yes, $7,000, but it was where she'd always dreamed of getting married, so yes. The designer dress from that boutique downtown, $4,000. Yes. The photographer she found on Instagram who'd shot some celebrity's wedding. His basic package was $6,000. Yes, yes, yes. I said yes so many times that I stopped looking at the numbers. I just signed the checks and watched my savings account drain like water from a cracked cup. But something else was draining too. something I didn't notice at first. The wedding planning started to feel less like a collaboration and more like a committee meeting where I didn't have a vote. Mom, Ethan and I have decided on the color scheme. Mom, we're going with a different caterer than the one you suggested. Mom, actually, we don't want a traditional cake. We're doing a dessert bar. Every conversation started with Mom and ended with me being gently, politely, systematically removed from the decision-making process. These are modern choices, Sarah would explain, in that patient voice you use with elderly relatives who don't understand technology. You wouldn't really get it. Wouldn't get it. I'd been planning this wedding in my head since she was 3 years old. But I swallowed my hurt and told myself this was normal. This was what happened when children became adults. They pulled away. They formed their own opinions. They chose their partner's preferences over their parents' traditions. It was healthy, probably. Natural. Wasn't this what I'd raised her for, to be independent? Still, it stung. I remember the day we went to finalize the menu with the caterer. Sarah had invited me as a courtesy, I think, because most of the decisions had already been made. I sat at that long table in the catering company's conference room while Sarah and Ethan discussed hors d'oeuvres and entree options with the kind of intensity usually reserved for peace negotiations. "What do you think, Mom?" Sarah asked at one point, clearly trying to include me. "I think the chicken sounds lovely," I offered. Ethan wrinkled his nose. "Chicken is so expected. Everyone does chicken." "The short ribs," Sarah agreed, touching his arm. "Right, babe." "Absolutely. More sophisticated." I nodded and smiled and said nothing about the fact that the short ribs were $3 more per plate, which, multiplied by 200 guests, was $600. $600 I'd be paying. But I signed the contract anyway, because what else was I going to do? The expenses kept climbing. The florist, the DJ, the chair covers. Yes, apparently chairs need covers now. The upgraded bar package because Sarah wanted a signature cocktail. The extra hour of venue time because the photographer needed it for golden hour shots. Every week, another email, another invoice, another payment plan. I took on extra shifts at work. I stopped eating out entirely. I started buying the generic brand of everything. I told my own friends I couldn't meet for coffee anymore because I was too busy. I didn't tell anyone how much I was spending. I especially didn't tell Sarah, because every time she called, bubbling with excitement about some new detail, the napkin rings, the guest book, the vintage car they'd rented for photos, I couldn't bear to dim that light in her voice. "Mom, it's going to be so perfect," she'd say. "Thank you for making this possible." And I'd tell her it was my pleasure, my joy, my honor. I didn't tell her that I'd already spent over $35,000, that I was now dipping into my emergency fund, that I'd started researching part-time jobs I could do on weekends to rebuild what I'd spent. Love has a cost, and I was paying it gladly. Or so I thought. 3 months before the wedding, the dynamic shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Ethan's parents got involved. The Kensington family, yes, that was their last name, which felt almost too perfect, lived in a gated community about an hour away. They had the kind of wealth that didn't announce itself loudly, but whispered constantly in expensive watches and tasteful art and the casual mention of their summer home. They hadn't shown much interest in the wedding planning until suddenly they did. Mrs. Kensington, call me Patricia, dear, started joining the planning meetings. She had opinions, lots of them, about everything. "The botanical gardens are charming," she said, in a tone that made charming sound like an insult. "But have you considered the country club? We're members, and I could get you a wonderful discount." Sarah looked torn. "Mom already put down a deposit." "Oh, I'm sure that's refundable," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. "These places understand when people upgrade." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The botanical gardens are where Sarah's always wanted to get married. Patricia smiled at me. It didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, though sometimes what we want as children isn't quite suitable for what we need as adults." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that I'd already paid for the venue, that this was my daughter's dream, that they couldn't just swoop in and change everything. But Sarah was looking at Ethan, and Ethan was looking at his mother, and I could see the wheels turning. "Let's just see the country club," Sarah said finally. "It wouldn't hurt to look." They ended up keeping the botanical gardens, but only because it turned out Patricia's wonderful discount at the country club still would have cost more than what I'd already paid. Small victories. But Patricia's involvement meant something else. It meant the Kensingtons were now part of every conversation, every decision, every plan. And gradually, subtly, I felt myself being repositioned from mother of the bride to something more like generous donor. I was thanked for my financial contributions, but my opinions, those were increasingly met with polite smiles and subject changes. "I think we should have a receiving line," I suggested once, "so everyone gets a chance to greet the bride and groom." "That's very traditional," Patricia said, "but we're going for more of a modern, relaxed vibe. We don't want the guests to feel obligated to wait in line." "Mom," Sarah said gently, "we appreciate your input, but we've got it handled." Suddenly it was we whenever Sarah disagreed with me. Sarah and Ethan, Sarah and the Kensingtons, but when it came time to sign a check, then it was just me. The rehearsal dinner was held at an Italian restaurant that Patricia had suggested. "Intimate," she said, "just close family and the wedding party." I bought a new dress for it. Not expensive, I couldn't afford expensive anymore, but nice. Floral print knee-length, the kind of dress that felt appropriate for a mother of the bride. When I walked into the restaurant, I could feel eyes on me. The Kensingtons were dressed like they were attending a charity gala. Patricia wore a silk designer dress that probably cost what I made in a month. Mr. Kensington had a suit jacket that looked custom-tailored. I felt suddenly, painfully aware of my off-the-rack dress and my 3-year-old shoes. But I held my head high and found my seat, which I noticed was not at the head table with Sarah and Ethan, but at a side table near the kitchen. Next to Ethan's uncle, who spent the entire dinner talking about his golf handicap to someone else. Patricia stood up to give a toast. She talked about Ethan's childhood, his achievements, his bright future. She welcomed Sarah into their family with words that sounded warm but felt proprietary. "We're so blessed," she concluded, "to be gaining such a lovely daughter." Everyone clapped. Sarah beamed. I waited for Sarah to say something, to stand up and thank me, acknowledge me, include me in this moment somehow. She didn't. Instead, she stood and clinked her glass and talked about how grateful she was for Ethan's family, for their support and their love. She thanked the bridesmaids. She thanked the groomsmen. She made a joke about the best man. And then she sat down. I sat there, holding my wine glass, feeling invisible. Feeling like a guest at an event I'd funded but wasn't really part of. After dinner, I tried to catch Sarah alone. "Honey," I said, pulling her aside, "I was thinking about tomorrow. I know you're busy, but maybe we could get ready together, just us before all the chaos." She smiled, but it was distracted. "Oh, Mom, I'm getting ready with the bridesmaids at the venue. There's a whole schedule. The makeup artist, the photographer coming to shoot us getting dressed. It's pretty packed." "Right, of course. Maybe I could just." "And Patricia is coming too. She specifically wanted to be there for it." Sarah squeezed my hand. "But you'll see me before the ceremony, obviously. It'll be fine." Fine. That word was doing a lot of work lately. "Sarah," I said, and I heard my voice crack just a little. "I feel like I'm not really part of this." Her face changed. Concern, but also something else. Frustration, maybe. "Mom, please don't do this now. Please don't make this about you." "I'm not trying to. This is my wedding, mine and Ethan's. And yes, you've been incredibly generous and I'm grateful, but that doesn't mean you get to control everything." Control? When had I tried to control anything? "I just wanted to be included," I whispered. "You are included. You'll be at the wedding. You'll be in all the photos. But Mom," she sighed, "you're being a little clingy and it's a lot right now. I need you to take a step back." I felt like she'd slapped me. Clingy. I was being clingy for wanting to share my daughter's wedding day. The wedding I'd paid for. The wedding I'd sacrificed my retirement for. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and walked away. That night, I lay in bed in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the past 28 years. Every bedtime story, every school project, every scraped knee and heartbreak and triumph. I thought about the promises I'd made to that little girl with the dish towel veil. And I wondered when exactly I'd become the problem. The wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed almost cosmic in its timing. Clear blue sky, gentle breeze, temperature in the low 70s. I got ready alone in my hotel room, did my own makeup, zipped myself into my mother-of-the-bride dress, pale blue, tasteful, carefully chosen to not outshine anyone. When I arrived at the botanical gardens, the place was already buzzing with activity. Florists arranging centerpieces, the catering staff setting up the reception tent, the photographer testing angles. I found the coordinator and asked if there was anything I could help with. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson," she said, checking her clipboard. "Actually, Sarah asked if you could help receive the flower delivery. They're running a few minutes behind, and she's worried they won't be done in time." So while my daughter was somewhere inside getting her makeup, done with her bridesmaids and future mother-in-law, I stood in the parking lot directing the florist's van to the service entrance. I helped carry in boxes of roses. I pointed the florist to the ceremony space. I signed for the delivery. And I told myself this was fine. This was helping. This was being part of it. But when I finally made my way to where Sarah was getting ready, hopping to at least see her before the ceremony started, I was stopped at the door by one of the bridesmaids. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Patterson. Sorry, Sarah said she's not seeing anyone right now. She's in full focus mode. But don't worry, you'll see her at the first look photo session." First look. That was the new tradition where the groom sees the bride before the ceremony. Supposedly more emotional, more photogenic. I wasn't invited to that either. So I went to my seat. Front row, yes. Right where the mother of the bride should be. I sat down an hour before the ceremony started and watched as guests trickled in, as the string quartet warmed up, as the world I'd paid for came to life around me. Patricia Kensington arrived 30 minutes before the ceremony, perfectly timed for maximum visibility. She walked down the aisle in a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my car, greeting guests like a queen. She sat on the groom's side, across from me, and we exchanged polite nods. I felt utterly alone. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I won't lie about that. When Sarah walked down the aisle, she was radiant. The dress I'd bought her fit like a dream. The flowers I'd paid for were stunning. The venue I'd chosen, despite Patricia's objections, was absolutely perfect. I cried, of course I cried. She was my baby. But my tears were complicated. Pride and love, yes, but also grief for something I couldn't quite name. The reception started smoothly. Cocktail hour, dinner service, toasts from the best man and maid of honor. Everything choreographed, everything perfect. I'd been told I wouldn't be giving a toast. "Just the best man and maid of honor," Sarah had said. "We want to keep it short." Meanwhile, Patricia had somehow secured a speaking slot to say a few words of welcome. But I didn't make a fuss. I smiled and clapped and ate my short ribs that cost $3 more per plate than the chicken would have. And then, an hour into the reception, something went wrong. The cake, the beautiful 5-tier cake from that expensive bakery Sarah had insisted on, was wheeled out for the cutting ceremony. But as the catering staff positioned it at the center of the dance floor, I noticed something was off. One side of the bottom tier was crushed. Not dramatically, but enough that the whole cake tilted slightly to the left, like it was leaning away from something. Sarah noticed it immediately. Her eyes went wide. She turned to Ethan, then to the coordinator, then. Her eyes found me. I don't know why. I was sitting at my table 20 feet away. I had nothing to do with the cake delivery or setup. But in that moment of panic, she looked at me like I was the answer to the question, who's responsible for this? She walked over quickly, her dress swishing. Her smile was still in place for the guests, but her voice was tight. "Mom, did you see what happened to the cake?" "I just noticed." "Were you in the back area? Did you see them bring it in?" "No, I've been sitting here." "Well, someone must have seen something. This is a disaster. The photos, we were supposed to cut the cake for photos, and now it looks ridiculous." "Sarah, I'm sure we can." Can you go ask someone what happened? Talk to the caterers or something." "Honey, I don't think." "Mom," her voice rose just enough that nearby guests glanced over. "Please, I'm asking you to help. This is my wedding day and I need you to fix this." Fix this? As if I'd broken it. As if every problem was mine to solve, but only after I'd been excluded from preventing it in the first place. I stood up. I walked to the back area where the catering staff was frantically trying to repair the cake with extra frosting and strategic repositioning of flowers. I found the coordinator. She explained that the cake had been damaged in transport, that the bakery had been called, that they were doing their best. "Is there anything we can do?" I asked. She looked stressed and apologetic. "Honestly, this is the best we can manage. The structure is compromised. We can make it look okay from one side, but we can't fully fix it." I went back to tell Sarah. But when I found her, she was surrounded by bridesmaids and Patricia, all examining the cake from different angles, discussing solutions. "Mom," Sarah said when she saw me, "where were you? Did you figure out what happened?" "They said it was damaged in transport." "In transport? So someone wasn't careful. Unbelievable. This is exactly the kind of thing I was worried about." "Sarah, accidents happen." "Do they? Or do they happen when people aren't paying attention? When vendors get hired because they're cheap instead of because they're good?" That landed like a punch. The bakery hadn't been cheap. It had cost $2,000 for that cake. I'd paid it without question because Sarah had wanted that specific bakery, had insisted they were the best. I don't think cost had anything to do with. "Mom, please, I need you to not make excuses right now. I need you to let me be upset about this." I stood there, something hardening in my chest. "Of course," I said quietly. "You're absolutely right to be upset." I walked away. I walked past my table, past the guests who were starting to notice the tension, past the bar where people were laughing and toasting. I walked to the edge of the garden, to a quiet corner where the landscaping gave way to a small bench hidden behind a rose trellis. And I sat down. I sat down, and I finally let myself feel the full weight of what had been happening for months. The slow, steady erasure of my presence in my daughter's life. The way I'd become nothing more than a checkbook with feelings that were inconvenient to the narrative. My phone buzzed. A text from the venue coordinator. "The final payment of $3,200 is due before the end of the event. Can you authorize the charge?" $3,200. For what? For a party where I didn't give a toast, didn't get ready with my daughter, didn't even get thanked. For the first time, a dangerous thought entered my mind. What if I just stopped? What if I stopped paying, stopped smoothing over problems, stopped absorbing every crisis and complaint and inconvenience? What if I let Sarah handle this herself? The thought was shocking. It felt wrong, petty, beneath me. But it also felt like oxygen after drowning. I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the reception continue without me. I could hear music, laughter, the DJ announcing the first dance. No one came looking for me. No one noticed I was gone. Finally, I stood up. I brushed off my dress. I walked back toward the reception. But I didn't go inside. Instead, I went to the parking lot. I got in my car. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and sat in the silence. Then I took out my phone and opened my banking app. I looked at the payment request from the venue coordinator. $3,200 for final services rendered. I thought about the $40,000 I'd already spent, the savings account that had been reduced to less than $3,000, the retirement I'd sacrificed. And I declined the charge. My hands were shaking as I did it. I felt like I was jumping off a cliff. Then I started my car and drove home. I didn't call Sarah that night. I didn't answer when she called me the next morning. I sat in my apartment and waited. The call came 2 days later. "Mom," Sarah's voice was tight, controlled. "I need to talk to you about something." "Okay." The venue called. They said the final payment was declined. They said you canceled it. "I didn't cancel it. I just didn't pay it." Silence. "What? What do you mean you didn't pay it?" "I mean I didn't authorize the charge, which means you'll need to handle it." "Mom, we can't afford. We weren't supposed to. You said you'd take care of everything." "I took care of everything I agreed to take care of. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the dress, the invitations. That was over $40,000, Sarah." "I know, and I appreciate." "Do you?" Another silence, this one heavier. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that I paid for an entire wedding where I wasn't allowed to give a toast, wasn't included in getting ready photos, wasn't consulted on any real decisions, and was blamed when something went wrong that I had nothing to do with." "Mom, that's not." "It means I sat alone at the rehearsal dinner I paid for. It means I carried in your flowers while you were with Patricia. It means I was called clingy for wanting to share your wedding day." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "So you're punishing me," she said finally. "You're punishing me by leaving us with a bill we can't pay." "I'm not punishing you. I'm teaching you." "Teaching me what?" "That independence has a cost. You wanted me to step back, to stop trying to control things, to let you handle your own wedding. So I did. This is what that looks like." "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "I can, actually. It's my money, Sarah. It always has been. You wanted your wedding to be yours and Ethan's. Well, now it is, completely." She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. "I can't believe you're doing this. After everything, after I trusted you. You trusted me to pay for things. That's not the same as trusting me to be your mother." I hung up before she could respond. The next few weeks were hell. Sarah called repeatedly. Sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes trying a different approach. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. Can we please talk about this?" Ethan called once, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, informing me that I was being incredibly immature, and that they'd expected better from someone your age. Patricia called too. That was perhaps the most surreal conversation. She spoke to me like I was a vendor who'd failed to deliver a service. "Mrs. Patterson," she said coolly, "I understand there's been some confusion about the wedding expenses. I think if we all sit down like adults, we can resolve this." "There's nothing to resolve," I told her. "My daughter wanted to plan her own wedding. She's getting exactly what she asked for." "You're being petty." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of being invisible while funding other people's dreams." I hung up on her too. The venue eventually worked out a payment plan with Sarah and Ethan. I heard through a mutual friend that they'd borrowed money from the Kensingtons to cover it. I heard that Sarah cried at Sunday dinner and told Patricia I'd betrayed her. I heard a lot of things. And I felt awful. Of course I did. I'm not made of stone. But I also felt something else. Something unfamiliar and a little bit frightening. I felt free. A month after the wedding, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Sarah, handwritten, which surprised me. My daughter rarely wrote anything by hand anymore. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened it. "Mom," it began, "I've been trying to call you, but I understand why you're not answering. I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to say some things. I've had a lot of time to think. About the wedding, about what happened, about what you said. You were right. I took you for granted. Worse, I took your love for granted. I assumed that because you were my mother, you'd just always be there, always saying yes, always smoothing things over, always paying for things. I didn't see how much you sacrificed, not just money, but yourself. Ethan and I have been paying off the venue bill. It's been hard, really hard. We had to cancel our honeymoon. We're eating ramen and watching every penny. And every time I make a payment, I think about you, about how you paid for everything without complaining, about how you worked 2 jobs for years to give me a life I never fully appreciated. I was so focused on having the perfect wedding that I forgot to honor the person who made it possible. I don't know if you'll forgive me. I don't know if we can go back to how things were. But I want you to know that I see you now, really see you, and I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand what I had. I love you, Mom. I always have. I just forgot to show it when it mattered most. Your daughter, Sarah. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't ready. But 2 weeks later, I called her. Mom, she sounded surprised, hopeful, afraid. Hi, baby. She started crying. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. Can we talk? Can I come over? Yes, but Sarah. Yeah. Things are going to be different now. I love you, but I'm done erasing myself to make you comfortable. I'm done being the invisible woman who pays for everything and asks for nothing in return. I understand. I want that too. I want you in my life, Mom, really in it. She came over that weekend. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd promised her that perfect wedding so many years ago, and we talked, really talked, about expectations and boundaries and love and sacrifice. It wasn't perfect. She said things that hurt. I said things that were hard for her to hear. But we were honest, finally painfully honest. I didn't realize how invisible you'd become, she said at one point, her eyes red from crying. Patricia was so present, so involved, and you were just quiet. I thought you didn't care as much. I cared so much that I'd forgotten how to ask for space in my own daughter's life. That's not right, Mom. You shouldn't have to ask. No, but I should have been clearer about what I needed. I should have said no sometimes instead of just saying yes to everything. She nodded. For what it's worth, Patricia has been a lot. Now that we're married, she has opinions about everything. Where we should live, how I should decorate, when we should have kids. And I keep thinking about how you never did that. You never tried to control my life. You just loved me and let me make my own choices. Even when those choices hurt me, I said softly. Even then, she reached across the table and took my hand. I'm going to do better, Mom, I promise. I squeezed her hand. We'll both do better. We're rebuilding, slowly. It's not the relationship we had before where I gave everything and asked for nothing. But it's better, I think, more real. Sarah calls me now, not just when she needs something, but to talk, to ask how I'm doing, to share her life with me. She invited me to dinner last month. Just the 2 of us, at a little restaurant neither of us could really afford. She insisted on paying. Consider it the first of many installments, she said with a sad smile. I can't pay you back $40,000, but I can pay you back in other ways. You don't owe me money, Sarah. I know, but I owe you something, respect, consideration, presence. We're getting there. Sometimes I think about that wedding day, about sitting alone in the garden, watching my daughter's celebration continue without me, about the moment I decided to stop being invisible. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than raising her alone, harder than working 2 jobs, harder than sacrificing my retirement. But it was also the most important. Because love isn't just about giving. It's also about being seen while you give. And my daughter, my beautiful, flawed, learning daughter, finally sees me. When people ask me about her wedding now, I tell them the truth. I tell them it was beautiful. I tell them my daughter looked radiant. And I tell them that yes, there were some complications, some hurt feelings, some hard lessons learned by everyone involved. But I don't tell them about the $40,000. I don't tell them about the final payment I refuse to make. Those are details that don't matter anymore. What matters is this. My daughter said I ruined her wedding. But what I actually did was save our relationship. I stopped being the mother who gave everything and became the mother who knew when to stop giving. And in the end, that was worth more than any wedding could ever be. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is teaching them that your love has value. Even when, especially when, it costs you everything to do it.